History is not always what they teach you in school. Some of it is buried, some of it is classified, some of it was erased on purpose, because the people in power decided you weren't meant to know. Tonight, we're pulling back 4 curtains, 4 chapters, 4 stories that your textbooks skipped, a shadow government hiding beneath your feet, a secret city of horrors in World War II that the world agreed to forget, 2 men who drew lines on a map over afternoon tea and broke the Middle East forever, and a civilization so advanced, so interconnected, that it collapsed in a single lifetime, and left a warning we still haven't learned to read. This is dark history, and it didn't end in the past. Let me ask you something. If tomorrow morning a nuclear strike wiped out Washington, D.C., Congress, the White House, the Supreme Court, who would run your country? Most people have never thought about it, but the United States government has been thinking about it for 70 years, and the answer they came up with is terrifying. At the height of the Cold War, the American government began a program so secret it wasn't confirmed to the public for decades. It was called Continuity of Government, or COG, and its purpose was simple: ensure the government survives no matter what, even if the people don't. They built bunkers, not small ones, cities, underground, carved into mountains. The Greenbrier in West Virginia, a luxury hotel on the surface. Beneath it, a full congressional bunker complete with Senate and House chambers, dormitories, a decontamination facility. It operated in secret for 30 years. Housekeeping staff thought they were maintaining storage rooms. They were maintaining a government in waiting. Mount Weather in the Virginia mountains. Still active today. Still classified. The full extent of what happens inside is unknown to the public. Raven Rock Mountain Complex. So deep, so fortified, it's been nicknamed the Underground Pentagon. On September 11, 2001, Vice President Dick Cheney was moved there within hours of the attacks. In 2001, as the Twin Towers burned, the COG plan was activated for the first time in American history. A secret group of senior officials, not elected, not publicly named, were dispersed to classified locations across the country. They were given the authority to run the United States government if Washington fell. We do not know who they were. We do not know the full extent of what powers they held. And here is the part that historians quietly note and politicians quietly ignore. The continuity of government framework has never been fully deactivated. It is still in place, right now. There are people and locations prepared to replace your elected government overnight. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's a matter of public record, tucked away in executive orders most people will never read. The shadow state doesn't hide in darkness. It hides in paperwork. In 1936, in Japanese-occupied Manchuria, in the city of Harbin, construction began on what would become one of the largest and most sinister complexes ever built. It stretched over 6 square kilometers. It had its own railway line, its own airstrip, dormitories, laboratories, crematoriums. It employed over 3,000 scientists, doctors, and support staff. To the locals, it was Unit 731, the headquarters of the Kwantung Army's Epidemic Prevention and Water Supply Unit, a public health operation. That was the cover. What was actually happening inside those walls was a biological and chemical weapons program, the largest in human history, conducted on living human beings. The prisoners were called maruta by the scientists. It is a Japanese word meaning logs. They were not considered human. They were test subjects. Thousands of prisoners, Chinese civilians, Korean prisoners, Soviet POWs and others, were subjected to experiments that have no parallel in modern history. Plague, cholera, anthrax, injected directly or released into enclosed spaces. Frostbite experiments. Vivisection, surgery conducted on conscious living subjects without anesthesia, because the scientists believed anesthesia would contaminate the results. Pressure chambers, centrifuges. No prisoner who entered Unit 731 as a test subject is known to have left alive. Conservative estimates put the death toll at 3,000. Some historians believe the real number is far higher. When the war ended in 1945, the United States military moved quickly into Japan, and what they found in the records of Unit 731 was extraordinary. Data. Decades of data on biological weapons, human physiology, the spread of plague and disease, data that no ethical scientist could ever produce, because it had been produced through mass murder. General Douglas MacArthur and the American intelligence establishment made a decision, a quiet one. They granted immunity to the officers of Unit 731, including its commanding general, Shiro Ishii, in exchange for that data. No Unit 731 scientist was ever tried at the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal. Ishii died in Tokyo in 1959, a free man in his own bed. The data was classified and handed to the US Biological Weapons Program. The Soviet Union, who had captured some Unit 731 members separately, tried 12 of them in 1949 at the Khabarovsk war crimes trial. The West dismissed it as communist propaganda. The deal was buried. Officially, it remained classified for decades. Japan did not formally acknowledge the existence of Unit 731 in school textbooks until the 1990s, and even then, the coverage was minimal, science paid for with blood, and the transaction was kept secret so that the payment would never have to be made. It is 1916. The First World War is grinding through its second year. The Ottoman Empire, which has ruled the Middle East for 4 centuries, is crumbling. In London, 2 men sit down with a map. Mark Sykes is a British diplomat, a well-travelled man, opinionated, energetic. He has spent time in the Middle East, though he does not speak Arabic fluently, and has met relatively few of the people whose fate he is about to determine. François-Georges Picot is a French diplomat. Calculating, colonial in instinct, France has long-standing interests in the Levant, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Picot intends to protect them. Together, they draw a line. A straight line from the E in Acre on the Mediterranean coast to the last K in Kirkuk in modern Iraq. Above that line, French influence. Below it, British. Then they divide the rest. Spheres of control, colour-coded zones, protectorates. Palestine here, Syria there, Iraq over here, Jordan, which doesn't yet exist, over there. They do it in an afternoon. The map had no regard for the people living on it. The borders cut through tribal lands that had existed for centuries. They placed Sunni and Shia Muslims together in artificial nations with no shared political tradition. They drew Kurdistan across 4 countries, ensuring that an entire ethnic group would never have a homeland. They placed the seeds of what would become the Israeli-Palestinian conflict directly into their framework. The Arab leaders who had fought alongside Britain, promised independence in exchange, were handed colonialism instead. The Hussein-McMahon correspondence had promised them a unified Arab state. Sykes-Picot cancelled that promise in secret. When the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia in 1917, they published the secret agreement to humiliate the Western Allies. The Arab world learned the truth from a communist press release. The cruelty of Sykes-Picot was not just in the lines, it was in the broken promise behind them. Sharif Hussein of Mecca had negotiated directly with the British. His sons had led Arab armies into battle against the Ottomans, believing they were fighting for independence. T.E. Lawrence, Lawrence of Arabia, had ridden with them, promised them a free Arab state, and many historians believe he genuinely meant it. He didn't know about Sykes-Picot either. When the agreement was exposed by the Bolsheviks in 1917, the Arab leadership felt the full weight of the betrayal. They had spilled blood for promises written in secret with disappearing ink. The British and French carved up the region anyway, installing kings of their own choosing, often from outside the regions they were placed to rule, and called it civilization. Faisal I, who had led the Arab revolt, was briefly king of Syria before the French expelled him by military force. The British then installed him as king of Iraq instead, a country that had never existed as a unified state, populated by Sunni Arabs, Shia Arabs, and Kurds who had no shared political identity, all forced together under a foreign monarch chosen by a colonial power in London. It was, from the beginning, a nation built on sand. It has been over 100 years. The borders Sykes and Picot drew, with modifications from subsequent treaties, are still the borders of the modern Middle East. The nations they invented are still there, and the tensions their decisions created are still very much alive. Iraq has never resolved the fault line between its Sunni, Shia and Kurdish populations, a tension that exploded into sectarian civil war after the 2003 American invasion and gave birth to the Islamic State. Syria's borders contain communities that were always more loyal to tribe, sect and region than to a state invented in Paris. The Syrian civil war that began in 2011 killed hundreds of thousands and displaced millions. The country is still shattered. Lebanon, that thin strip on the Mediterranean coast, was specifically designed by France to have a Christian majority, carving it out of Greater Syria to serve French Catholic interests. Today, it is paralysed by a sectarian political system still running on colonial-era demographics. In 2020, an explosion in Beirut killed over 200 people and damaged half the city, in large part because a corrupt, dysfunctional government could not manage its own port. The Kurdish people, 25 to 35 million of them, remain the largest ethnic group on earth without a homeland, split across Turkey, Iraq, Syria and Iran. Every attempt at Kurdish self-determination has been met with violence. The borders guarantee it. When ISIS declared its caliphate in 2014, one of its first symbolic acts was bulldozing the border berm between Iraq and Syria. They released a video of it. They called it Smashing Sykes-Picot. Whatever else ISIS was, and it was monstrous, that video resonated in ways that made Western governments deeply uncomfortable, because the people watching it in the region understood, on a visceral level, exactly what was being said. 2 men, a pencil, and an afternoon. 100 years later, the wars have not stopped, and most people in the West have never heard their names. Imagine a world more interconnected than you might think possible 3,000 years ago. It is 1200 BC. The Mediterranean basin is humming. Egypt under Rameses the Great is a superpower, trading gold and grain across the known world. The Mycenaean Greeks are building palace cities, Mycenae, Tiryns, Pylos, sophisticated centers of administration with written records, long-distance trade, professional armies. The Hittite Empire in modern Turkey is a rival superpower, signing treaties with Egypt in what historians call the world's first known peace accord. Cyprus is a copper exporting hub. Ugarit, on the Syrian coast, is a cosmopolitan trading city where merchants from a dozen civilizations walk the same streets. These civilizations are not isolated. They are deeply, systematically connected. They trade copper from Cyprus, tin from Afghanistan, grain from Egypt, cloth from the Aegean. Letters fly between kings written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the age, the English of its era. It is, in many ways, the first globalized world. And then, within the space of roughly 50 years, between approximately 1200 and 1150 BC, almost all of it collapses. Not one civilization, not 2. Nearly every major society in the Eastern Mediterranean simultaneously falls. Mycenae, destroyed and abandoned. The Linear B writing system, the earliest known form of Greek, disappears entirely for 400 years. Greece enters a dark age. The Hittite Empire collapses almost overnight. Its capital Hattusa is burned and abandoned. The empire never recovers. It simply ceases to exist. Ugarit, destroyed by fire around 1185 BC. Among the last documents found in its ruins is a letter, never sent, from the king of Ugarit to the king of Cyprus. It describes enemy ships offshore. It asks for help. No help came. Even Egypt, the superpower, barely survives and emerges from the period diminished and permanently weakened. Across the region, trade collapses. Populations plummet. Writing systems disappear. Cities are abandoned. It takes some regions 300 to 400 years to recover. Here is the haunting part. We don't know exactly why. Historians have proposed climate change, a severe drought lasting decades that disrupted agriculture across the region. They have proposed the so-called Sea Peoples, mysterious invaders referenced in Egyptian records who swept through the coast destroying cities, though we still don't know who they were or where they came from. They have proposed internal rebellions, systems collapse, disruption of the tin trade that made bronze weapons possible, earthquakes, famines. The most compelling modern theory advanced by historian Eric Klein in his landmark work on the subject is that it was not any single cause, but all of them simultaneously. A perfect storm of interconnected failures in a system that had become too complex, too interdependent, too fragile. When one part broke, the whole thing came apart. 3,000 years later, you live in the most interconnected civilization in human history. Your food arrives on global supply chains. Your economy runs on international finance. Your communications depend on undersea cables and satellite systems. The computer chip in your phone contains materials from a dozen countries, assembled by another, sold by another. Everything depends on everything else. Historians who study the Bronze Age collapse do not say this to frighten you. They say it because the pattern is recognizable. The Bronze Age world was not primitive, it was sophisticated. It had survived centuries. Its leaders thought it was permanent, and within a single lifetime, within the memory of living people, it was gone. The ruins of Ugarit are still there. The unfinished letter from a king asking for help that never came is in a museum in Damascus. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, and some of its verses sound very familiar. Shadow governments beneath mountains. Scientists freed in exchange for the data of mass murder. Two men who drew a world on a napkin. A civilization swallowed by its own complexity. These are not ancient stories. They are the foundations of the world you live in today. History is always present. You just have to know where to look. If this made you think, share it. Because the most dangerous thing isn't the dark. It's choosing not to turn on the light.